Amen. Happy Sabbath? We have some new faces here today that I didn't meet yesterday, so welcome. I'm going to change course just for this Sabbath because we have such a large congregation here today and many of you were not here yesterday. So I want to just do a short revision so we can keep in our minds and pick this up again either later today if there's time or tomorrow. So we started with a brief look at parable teaching, and then we used that method of parable teaching where Jesus took something that the disciples needed to understand, didn't understand. And what was that? They didn't understand the kingdom of heaven. The Pharisees didn't understand it. John the Baptist didn't understand it. And because the disciples had been taught by the Pharisees and John the Baptist, they did not understand the kingdom of heaven. So all through his parables, Jesus is saying the kingdom of heaven is like a sower. The kingdom of heaven is like a net. The kingdom of heaven is like, and we listed parable after parable. So through parables, Jesus was trying to correct their misconceptions that they had been taught originally in their early days by their own Jewish leadership, and then that had been continued by John the Baptist, with his misconceptions of the Messiah, the glorious King. So Jesus uses parables by taking something they do know, a net. Some of these disciples were fishermen. He's going to talk about fishing and talk about a net, and he's going to use that story that they do know, fishing, to teach them what the kingdom of heaven is like. And he's trying to help them unlearn their misconceptions about what the kingdom of heaven looks like. So he takes what they do know and compares and contrasts it against what they don't know. And we find that this was Jesus' choice methodology in teaching the disciples, and he tells them, to you it's given to understand the kingdom of heaven. To them, to the Jewish leadership, to the Pharisees, it's not given. They cannot, they will not understand it. But for this group that Jesus is training, for them, it is for them to understand that the nature of the kingdom of heaven, which is why it was to them that he would open up and explain these parables. And then at Pentecost, Ellen White says the Holy Spirit is poured out, the early rain begins to fall that's going to lead to the latter rain in the closing scenes of Earth's history. And as that early rain fell at Pentecost, what did they understand? Parables. So when the latter rain falls at the end of the world, what do you think we'll understand? Parables. So if you see a group teaching using parable methodology, what do you know? You know that we're in the final scenes of Earth's history. From that model that Ellen White uses from Pentecost to the Second Advent, we know we're in the history of the latter rain. So we've taken this concept, and this is something that over the last, particularly the last few years, has been expounded upon until we have a greater understanding of the methodology behind it. And I understand that one of our brothers is discussing parable methodology in presentations here as well. So you will see more evidence of that methodology. What we did was we then went to an example. We took the two parts of Daniel 11 verse 40. It comes in a part A and a part B. It comes in part A, a time of the end, 1798, the defeat of the king of the north, and then part B, the time of the end, 1989, the defeat of the king of the south. And we overlaid these two histories. We saw that the king of the north was defeated in 1798, but we wanted to expand upon that and actually see what it looked like in its history. There was an ongoing war between the king of the north and the king of the south, 1789 to 1798. In the midst of this war, there were confrontations, and one significant battle in 1796, when Napoleon fought against the papal troops and defeated them. But prophecy marks 1798. There is no battle in 1798, but General Berthier marches into Rome and he takes the Pope captive, and we all know that history. So the Pope is taken captive in 1798. Ellen White's quote from Revelation 13 and makes that direct link for us. He that took people into captivity, his punishment will be to be taken captive himself. He that killed people, his punishment will be to be killed himself. So in 1798 he's taken captive. That portion, that half of that prophecy is fulfilled, but when is he killed? 1799. Ellen White links Pope Pius VI as an individual fulfilling that prophecy. We don't separate a king and a kingdom or a pope and the papacy. There is no king without a kingdom. There is no kingdom unless it has a king. So we see that the Pope himself could fulfill that prophecy, and she identifies, we read that quote, where she says Pius VI was taken captive and he himself fulfilled that prophecy, then dying in 1799. So we see a deadly wound, a progressive fall, and then a death. And it's the deadly wound that prophecy marks as significant. We took that to Daniel 11:40 Part B. There's an ongoing war between the king of the north and the king of the south. It's the Cold War. There are significant events in that history, but it's 1789 the prophecy marks. The fall of the Berlin Wall is the defeat of the Soviet Union, but did the Soviet Union end in 1989? No. 1989 is a deadly wound for the Soviet Union. It's going to fall, but it hasn't yet completed that process. Now it's just going to go through a slow, inevitable dying until it finally dies in 1991 and the Soviet Union is dissolved. So prophecy marks the deadly wound, whether it's 1798 or 1989. And we're also able to identify through the structure the death. Goes into captivity because it took people captive, dies because it killed people. But then we understand that the king of the north would resurrect as modern Babylon. And if this war, deadly wound, death ended in a resurrection in this story, then using this same method of compare and contrast, then this war, deadly wound, death must result in what for the king of the south? It also has to resurrect, something that we identified has already happened through Vladimir Putin, and how he's been able to resurrect Russia as a global superpower. We then looked at this study. This one compare and contrast can take us into two different studies. We can take this resurrection of the papacy and see that it resurrects as modern Babylon, and then we can build a whole study upon the counterfeit. Or we can take this resurrection of the king of the south and build a whole study on World War III based on the two world wars previously. So this one study can branch into two different studies, and these two, this study of World War III and this study of the counterfeit, really compose the Midnight Cry message. Neither of these two studies were discovered through understanding this compare and contrast. But what I wanted us to see is that we could have identified them purely through the structure. The structure itself is solid enough to take us to these two studies. However, we came to this through an understanding of Pyrrhus and the Diadochi Wars, which gave us more information, and we came to this study of the counterfeit through understanding modern Babylon and its involvement in the world wars. But it can be done just through the counterfeit. So that's where I want to leave this study until we come back to it tomorrow. Or later today, depending on our time frame. And we'll continue with that because I'm not sure how long that will take us, but we're going to go through a revision, not in every detail, but a revision of World War I and World War II. So we will come back to that. I want to look at a subject that has caused a great deal of trouble in the movement in the last few months since the end of August. And I'll begin that by having us look, if you would turn to Genesis chapter 9. Genesis chapter 9. In Eden, what did Adam and Eve eat? What was the diet of Adam and Eve? They had fruits, vegetables. I'm just going to summarize it and say they were vegan. At the beginning, they were vegan. So this is Eden. And then we go to Genesis chapter 9. The first verses 1 to 4. They've just come out of the ark, and God blesses Noah and his sons. And he says unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as the green herb have I given you all things. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. So we come to the history of Noah. And what are they given? Flesh. They're given flesh to eat. Meat to eat. And who tells them to eat it? God. So this instruction is given by God. People don't seem to have any problem with this. They see this instruction, they rationalize it away, and they see Noah, under God's instruction, was told to eat meat. They think little more of it. Turn to Luke chapter 24. So through the history of Noah, they ate meat. We come to the history of Moses. This is the alpha history of... I'll try and go bigger, I know where a big room was. This is the alpha history of ancient Israel. And through all of the writings of Moses, what is God directing them as far as their diet is concerned? So in Eden, they're vegan. And then we come to the time of Noah, and God tells them to eat flesh, animal flesh. We go through the history of the beginning of ancient Israel, this alpha history under Moses. And we won't go there for time, but if you looked through, scanned in your minds through the books of the Pentateuch, through the Levitical laws, and how does God instruct them in regards to their diet? Does he instruct them to stop eating meat? No. He just gives them more specifics of how they are to practice this. So he just puts into laws how to eat meat. This being the history, the alpha history of ancient Israel. So at the beginning, Adam and Eve were vegan. Then Noah, he's instructed by God to eat himself and to feed his family flesh food. You come into the history of Moses, this alpha history of ancient Israel, and instead of starting to remove this, God actually starts codifying how they are to practice it. And he starts telling them how they are to eat meat, how they are to prepare it. We go through the history of the kings, through the whole of the history of the Old Testament, and does anything change? No, nothing changes. Then we come down to the history of the end of ancient Israel. You meet the history, the end of ancient Israel. The history of Christ. Now, people don't seem to have any problem with the history of Noah through Moses. Really, with the whole of the Old Testament, people don't seem to have a problem with all of the codified instructions of how to eat meat. But you come to Luke 24, and all of a sudden, people start having all kinds of heartburn about this. Because in Luke 24, reading from around verse 36. Previous to this, we have Jesus walking with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. They see, didn't our heart burn within us? They start, that their eyes are opened. They see that Jesus has been with them, is with them, and then he vanishes. They say, didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked by the way and he opened to us the Bible, the scriptures? They return to the 11 disciples and recount what they had seen. As those disciples who walked with Jesus on the road to Emmaus are talking to the others, Jesus comes and stands in the middle of them. And he says to them, peace be unto you. Verse 37, but they were terrified and affrighted, and supposed that they had seen a spirit. And he said unto them, why are ye troubled? And why do thoughts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see. For a spirit hath not flesh and bones, as ye see me have. So they are troubled, and they think he's some type of spirit, not the real Jesus. And he says, touch me, feel me, you can feel flesh and bone. When he had thus spoken, he showed them his hands and his feet. He's showing them the holes of the nails. And while they yet believed, not for joy, and wondered, And while they yet believed not for joy and wondered, he said unto them, Have ye here any meat? So Jesus is going to prove to them that he's a real living human being, the real Jesus. And they gave him a piece of broiled fish and of an honeycomb, and he took it and did eat before them. So now people start having heartburn, because now you see Jesus himself eating meat. We've gone through the whole of the Bible from the time of Eden all the way through the history of Christ. We could continue it. I'll mark in here Revelation. So we've been from Revelation, from Genesis through to Revelation. We've covered all the New Testament scriptures. And nowhere is the instruction given that people are to stop eating meat. And then we come to the history, the alpha history of modern Israel. This is the history of our pioneers from 1798 through the days of Ellen White, particularly her early days, as we will see. And I want to quote from Councils on Diets and Foods. I'm going to quote from Councils on Diets and Foods 205.4. She says, we are to be brought into connection with the masses. Should health reform be taught them in its most extreme form, harm would be done. We ask them to leave off eating meat and drinking tea and coffee. So what are the Millerites all of a sudden asking people to do? Stop eating flesh. Where do you get that in the Bible? Remember, you're living back here. You're walking through this history. All you have is Ellen White standing up and saying, you need to stop eating meat. And what can they say? Where's your thus saith the Lord to tell me to stop eating meat? God gave it to us as food. And many people use that argument. God gave that flesh to us as food, and now you're asking me to stop eating it? So we'll continue to read. We ask them to leave off eating meat and drinking tea and coffee. This is well. We should do this. But some say that milk should also be given up. This is a subject that needs to be carefully handled. There are poor families whose diet consists of bread and milk, and if they can get it, a little fruit. All flesh food should be discarded, but vegetables should be made palatable with a little milk or cream or something equivalent. The poor say, when health reform is presented to them, what shall we eat? We cannot afford to buy the nut foods. As I preach the gospel to the poor, I am instructed to tell them to eat that food which is most nourishing. I cannot say to them, you must not eat eggs, or milk, or cream. You must use no butter in the preparation of food. The gospel must be preached to the poor, and the time has not yet come to prescribe the strictest diet. She begins in the second sentence by referring to it as health reform in the most extreme. She closes the paragraph by referring to it as the strictest diet. What is health reform in the most extreme? What is the strictest diet? Vegan. Is the time yet come? No. The next paragraph. But I wish to say that when the time comes that it is no longer safe to use milk, cream, butter, and eggs, God will reveal it. No extremes in health reform are to be advocated. So does she advocate a vegan diet? No. The question of using milk and butter and eggs will work out its own problem. At present, we have no burden on this line. Let your moderation be known unto all men. So at the very beginning, they're vegan. In the time of Noah, they're given flesh as food, meat. Through the history of the Old Testament, and we focused on the beginning of ancient Israel, the history of Moses, all of this instruction on meat eating is codified. It's placed into law how they are to eat meat. Nowhere in any of those writings does it tell them that meat is not an ideal diet. It's not even said meat is unhealthy for you. They're just told how to eat it. You come to the end of ancient Israel and you see Jesus eating meat. He asks for food, they give him fish, and he eats it. And now people begin to have an issue. We marked here Revelation. This is the end of the Old and New Testament. We've been from Genesis to Revelation, and we see no change in that prescribed diet. I want to continue reading now from Counsels on Diet and Foods 411.4. Counsels on Diets and Foods 411.4. She says, I present the word of the Lord God of Israel. Because of transgression, the curse of God has come upon the earth itself, and upon the cattle, and upon all flesh. Human beings are suffering the results of their own course of action in departing from the commandments of God. The beasts also suffer under the curse. Meat eating should not come into the prescription for any invalids from any physicians from among those who understand these things. Disease in cattle is making meat eating a dangerous matter. The Lord's curses upon the earth, upon man, upon beasts, upon the fish in the sea. So what else was cursed? Fish. The flesh Jesus ate was cursed. And as transgression becomes almost universal, the curse will be permitted to become as broad and as deep as the transgression. Disease is contracted by the use of meat. The diseased flesh of these dead carcasses is sold in the marketplaces, and disease among men is the sure result. The Lord would bring his people into a position where they will not touch or taste the flesh of dead animals. Then let not these things be prescribed by any physicians who have a knowledge of the truth for this time. There is no safety in the eating of the flesh of dead animals. And in a short time, the milk of the cows will also be excluded from the diet of God's commandment-keeping people. In a short time, it will not be safe to use anything that comes from the animal creation. Is that time her day? No. So she's saying that there's a time, not right then as she's writing this, but coming, when it will be no longer safe to eat or ingest anything that comes from an animal. In a short time, it will not be safe to use anything that comes from the animal creation. Those who take God at his word and obey his commandments with the whole heart will be blessed. Next paragraph. Again, I will refer to the diet question. We cannot now do as we have ventured to do in the past in regard to meat eating. It has always been a curse to the human family. What was Noah given? What was the meat? He was given a curse. Does God say that when he gives it to Noah? No, it's given as if it is a gift. But if it's always been a curse to the human family, it has been a curse from its very inception. God gave Noah a curse. In the paragraph we read, the first paragraph of 411.1, How does she define a curse? I present the word of the Lord God of Israel. Because of transgression, the curse of God has come upon the earth itself, and upon all flesh. Human beings are suffering the result of their own course of action in departing from the commandments of God. So what is a curse? I will put it here so we can keep it as we have to rub out this board. A curse equals result. The results of human transgression. The problem with the word curse is that we read it as if it is somehow a punishment meted out by God. As if somehow God says, I don't like this person, or I don't like this group of people, so I'm going to make their life harder. A curse is not that. A curse is an inevitable result of our own human transgressions. So God allows the human family to start eating flesh meat. And people justify it and say that they had to because when they came off the ark, nothing was growing. But if they had enough food to keep them alive on the ark for those 40 days, they could have taken enough to last longer to plant. There was already greenery arising, and if that was the case, they could have stopped eating flesh as soon as they had a crop. But they're given this meat eating to last through generations. And then what does God have to do? He has to start bringing them back to their condition of Eden, because it began in Eden, and we're going to end in Eden. So for 6,000 years, God has borne with our own results that He does not want, that are not ideal for us. He has allowed those results to work their way through the human family. He codified them into law. He continued through them through the whole of the Old and the New Testament. He sanctioned them Himself when Jesus came to earth and ate meat. And from Genesis to Revelation, He never condemns it. Then we come into the time period of Ellen White, and she starts saying we should not be eating any flesh food, any animal meats. And people say to her, how can you say that? We have a thus saith the Lord that says we are to eat meat. God gave it to us as food, and now you're telling us not to eat it. Who do you think you are? And she has no inspiration, no direct quote to back her up on that. More than that, she says the time is coming, but it's not yet, not as she's writing it. The time is coming when we must discard all animal products. And we come down to our dispensation. We come into the immediate history of modern Israel. And what do we identify as being our ideal diet? What diet does this movement endorse? Vegan. The diet of Eden. Back in her day, she called that extremes. The most extreme of the diets. What we see is a line of progression, a 6,000 line of progression, where it began in Eden with the ideal diet, and then through human transgression, God allows meat eating to be introduced to the human family. Never ideal, but becomes a consequence of our own actions. And then from the history of Noah, He allows it to continue through the Old and New Testament. He sanctions it Himself, but for 6,000 years He has to start cutting out of His people those wrong lifestyle habits. And you come to the history of modern Israel, and Ellen White in her writings starts to counsel on diet, and she has her visions in relation to diet reform. She understands that we're no longer to eat flesh meats. And then in the future, she identifies that we must take this position of diet where we don't partake of any animal products at all. This is a study that we would say discusses the question of diet, identifies this question of diet as it is, as God counsels us on how we should eat through different dispensations. Now, dispensations have become an ugly word in this movement. As those who have attacked us now reject this study of dispensationalism. And the reason they did that I will discuss in a moment. But what I want you to see is that all of us accept this study. No one looks at this study and rejects this. No one can say, no one in this movement and no one who has just left this movement will look back and say, we have a thus saith the Lord that says that we are to eat meat. Moses told us how we were to eat meat and he never condemned it. Christ ate meat. Then no one down here says, we have a thus saith the Lord, we should be eating meat. No one does that. The reason that they don't do that is because they like this story. This suits them. They're happy for this. They're conservative Adventists. And conservative Adventists know that the ideal diet is the diet of Eden. But this model, this structure of dispensationalism is identical to the studies that have been done in the previous months in regards to race and in regards to gender. When it comes to diet, no one has a problem. No one has a problem with saying Jesus ate meat, and while I would never say I'm better than Christ, I choose not to eat fish. No one would say that. Everyone recognizes that the dispensation of Moses required different attitudes in regards to diet than the dispensation of Christ. And the dispensation of Ellen White required different attitude in respect to diet than the dispensation of the 144,000. The problem people have is that the closer and closer these dispensations come to our own, the more and more they want to see things purely from the perspective of that dispensation. I'll give an example. There's people down here brother and sister X, and they say, God gave us meat to eat. Ancient Israel ate it. Christ ate it. That's all fine. Ellen White says we should not eat meat, but we should eat dairy and eggs. Or she at least sanctions that in certain cases. And they say, Ellen White gave it to us. Ellen White says that to not eat dairy and eggs is to have an extreme diet. Therefore, in this dispensation, we're not going to be vegan, we're going to not eat meat, but we'll eat dairy and eggs. So what are they doing? What's their problem? Fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is they're not realizing that we don't take Ellen White, thus saith the Lord, any more than we take Moses. We are not in Moses' dispensation. We are not in Christ. We are also not in Ellen White's. As we read Moses, it's easy to see that we aren't going to practice the Levitical law when it comes to diet, or when it comes to capital punishment, or when it comes to cleanliness, when it comes to what material our clothes are made of. We don't follow all the instructions that Moses writes into law. When Jesus ate fish, we don't practice that today. But suddenly when Ellen White says it, people start having problems. They start having heartburn here when Jesus ate fish. Now they're struggling because they see it in the New Testament and Jesus did that. He sanctioned it. Now people have problems. But it's here when Ellen White says that We shouldn't take such a hard position on dairy and eggs. Now they want to take her quotes and apply them to 2019. And we have people who will never eat fish, but will eat dairy and eggs. And I don't do this study to make any comment about anyone's diet. If I saw you eating eggs, to be honest, I just don't find it easy to judge people's practices. It's this study, the purpose of this study is to not make a point about diet, it's to make a point about how we read and study inspiration. That's the point of this study. It's not a judgment on how anyone eats. There are still very small, specific areas where people don't have access to much food, and we will encourage them, if necessary, to eat dairy and eat eggs. Those are extremely limited situations. We recognise that they still exist. But the purpose of this study primarily is not to have anything to do with diet. It's about how we read. The Old and New Testament take a certain position on diet. Ellen White starts to change it. She doesn't take the hard position that we do. We have them written into the baptismal vows of this movement, what we recognise to be dietary diet. And the problem people have is how to read these quotes. FFA and those who have left reject the model of dispensationalism. They reject that what God said in one dispensation, the instructions He gives His people in one dispensation, can be different to the instructions that He will give us today. And what I want you to see is the extreme hypocrisy of that position. They practice dispensationalism themselves wherever they like the conclusion of the study. But when they don't like the conclusion of the study, they attack and reject dispensationalism. This model of the curse of a perfect diet, then changing under a curse where God is purely recognizing the inevitable consequences of our own actions. Now we have to eat meat. He has to shorten human lifespan, and we're going to eat meat anyway, whether He likes it or not. It's just consequences. But He never condemns it through Scripture. Ellen White starts to change it. Her dispensation gives us solid counsel. But we recognise that when she says this position is extreme, the vegan position, it's the position that if we were to go into the world today, we have and already do teach. Adventism already practices dispensationalism when they like the conclusion of the study. When I taught dispensationalism in Germany, as regards to race and gender, the point I kept trying to emphasize is that this is a method already in practice, not just in Adventism, not just in a movement, but within Adventism. It's a proven methodology to read something in a past dispensation and apply it differently to our own. We already do that. All that I wanted to do was to show us that we are inconsistent in how we do that. We are not consistent enough in practicing dispensationalism, not just dispensationalism, but all the rules of parable teaching. And I want to demonstrate the two different methods that we have. We have we have two methods. The first is progression. What's the second? Repeat and enlarge. We've become very good at repeat and enlarge. We do something like we take the end of ancient Israel, we did this in presentations before. We took the end of ancient Israel and we overlaid it This is the Amiga of ancient Israel. And we overlaid it with the Amiga of modern Israel. The history of the early church, the history of the 144,000. So we took this history, two histories of the success, and we used the second method, repeat and enlarge. And when we do that, we could draw specific conclusions about what we are to expect to see in our time frame. For example, we can take Pentecost, and we can take that to Panya. The disciples go back to the church. We go back to the church with a message. We draw all of these conclusions and lessons. We talked about the cross. Lined it up with 2019. We talked about Judas leaving the table. We talked about FFA and those that followed them. Those who couldn't let go of the misconceptions of the first angel, whether that's John or Elder Jeff. So we used this method of repeat and enlarge, and we've become quite good at that. We use this more than we use or understand progression. But if we were to do that, use this method and take it to diet, how would we fare? Would any of us be vegan? No. We would be eating not just dairy, eggs, all of those things. We would be eating flesh meats. Because if we just do a repeat and enlarge, a cut and a paste of these two histories and use them as a study for diet, we will come to the wrong conclusion. Repeat and enlarge does not always work. We have to also remember our first method being progression. At the very beginning, we had a certain diet. At the very end, we will have a certain diet. So we are in the history of the 144,000 from 1989. Question: does God require us to wait until the new earth to practice diet reform? No. When we practice diet reform? Now, God expects us to have a complete restoration when it comes to our diet before He comes back to this earth. This is a line of progression. The line of restoration. The line which is to restore certain things in us, certain things that affect us before the second advent, not in the world. Those things that Eden. God expects us to practice Eden before we get there. We might have a faith that will come back. Again, this study is not about diet. The study is to show how we study and already practice, whether you're Adventist, whether you follow FFA, or whether you follow this movement, already practice dispensationalism. The only problem is some people do not practice it with consistency. We know if we will close in a prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Thank you that even before you come back, you wish to restore your image in us. I pray, Lord, that we will be compliant with those ethics, that we will put the theory into practice and will attempt, Lord, to already have a good on it, to already create it into our lives. I pray, Lord, that we'll understand the methodology that you wish us to use and use it consistently. In Jesus' name I pray. Some people have handed in their questions on paper. There's been some really difficult questions already. Good question, a really good question. If you have any for this evening, if you could write them down and hand them in. We'll start with a short silent prayer. And so in our previous study, we began to look at diet. And we addressed this subject not really to deal with the question of diet, but to dig out how we study. Now, people wouldn't see diet as being a prophetic issue, but what I want us to see is that our methodology, progression of opinion and large, can be taken, should be taken consistently to every single issue that we face. All that we need to do is to identify how to use or which of these two methods to use, and then search out that study. So we talked about diet, the diet in Eden that we're all familiar with. We talked about how sin came, it destroyed that diet, and that's evidence at Noah when God instructs him to begin to eat and to feed his family the flesh of animals. You can go through the time of Abraham and the patriarchs, and they followed that same diet. They continued to eat meat. When you come to the time of Moses, it's codified into Jewish law. Nowhere in Leviticus and in those books does it state that meat eating is not ideal, it's not what God originally intended, they should be wary of it. All it does is just codify it. The rules of how they are to prepare and eat meat. Then we come to the history of Christ, and we see that instructions are not given here regarding meat eating, that there is essentially no real change here. Jesus ate fish. We have that. People start to have problems. The reason they start to have problems here instead of here is because people have this connection to Christ and to the New Testament. The Levitical law has already been done away with. We come to the cross and they're no longer going to practice many of the instructions given by Moses, and yet still there is meat eating. So people have this kind of emotional connection to this history after the cross, where they see Jesus eating fish and it troubles them. Then we come to this history of modern Israel, the Millerites, and Ellen White starts telling the Millerites that she has had instructions. She's understood that we are to stop eating flesh meats, and people have a problem with that. The reason they have a problem with that is what justification can she give for that instruction when it's something that God instituted? But she clarifies that by saying that there is a more extreme position, really the ultimate position, where we should also give up all animal products, dairy, eggs, etc. And she says that the time will come. In other words, the time is not here now, where we need to take a firm position on these things. So, as she's writing counsels on diets and foods, those portions that's put into that later population, she's saying that that time is not yet, but it will be in the future. Adventists, as they go through this history, and it's only a tiny space on the board, but I want to draw your attention to it, they begin to take the position that the time has come. So well before 1989, most Adventists, not most conservative Adventists, are recognizing that they need to take this firm position on diet. By the time you get to 1989, in our dispensation, we recognize in the vows that recognizing some people are in extreme conditions, but we recognize that the only diet that we can endorse is a vegan diet. So we see this not through this second method of repeat and enlarge. You can't take the end of ancient Israel, overlay it with the end of modern Israel, and do a study on diet reform. If you do that, we would never have given up meat. Instead, we need to use the second method, the first method highlighted, a line of progression. The diet in Eden will be completed over 6,000 years, restored, Eden to Eden. But God does not expect us to wait to the new earth, to a new Eden, to start practicing diet reform. Instead, He expects us to put those reforms into place before He comes back at the second advent. In the history of the 144,000, He's doing a work of restoration in His people to prepare them for heaven. Part of that restoration involves diet reform, but it also involves a couple of other issues. So this line from Noah, Abraham, ancient Israel, the history of Moses, the history of Christ, the history of the Millerites, the history of the 144,000. This is all a study that we would call a study on dispensations, or using the methodology of dispensationalism. When we say a dispensation, what is the definition of a dispensation? FFA and those following them make this into something ugly, like it's some type of Catholic, pagan, evil word. And Elder Covington has done studies on this, which are highly enlightening. But it's a word that you actually find throughout inspiration. So if they want to attack the word itself, again, you're going to come into a problem when God uses that word in inspiration. All that a dispensation means is a system that exists for a certain time period. So there's a system in the time of Moses that was done away with in the time of the early church. There was an issue regarding bicycles in the time of Ellen White's day that does not apply to our day. There's specific instructions for a specific time period, specific instructions for a specific dispensation, and those instructions can change over time. When we place this on a line, those instructions are placed on a line of progression or restoration, and we are seeing how they slowly changed over 6,000 years. The issue is over a long period of time resolved. And we've done this, we did this in the presentation this morning before, as it regards to diet. And I wanted to make the point that prior to 1989, many of God's people had already recognized that the time had come. It had already come to a point in time prior to 1989 that we were to endorse a vegan diet. This study on diet, FFA would have no problem with. They would agree with this whole line of progression or restoration. They could easily see that the instructions to Moses and what Christ endorsed and what none of the thus saith the Lords over the Old and New Testament ever dealt with, in the time of Ellen White started to be dealt with, and in our dispensation there is a firm position. Veganism. They will have no problem with this progression from dispensation to dispensation. The reason they don't have a problem with that is because they like the outcome. All that we did in the last, presented in the months of August and September this year, was say, why aren't we consistent when we use this methodology? And the key studies that we brought this methodology to, the methodology of progression or restoration, is the two subjects of how race is understood in inspiration and how gender is understood in inspiration. So we'll begin with race, and I just want to, in another pen, just highlight some key points on our line. Race fits most neatly over this structure of diet, because it also begins in the time of Noah. In the time of Noah, he comes off the ark. He has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is the father of Canaan. Now Ham, he sins before his father. And what does Noah pronounce upon his son Canaan?
Curse.
So we have a curse. Ham sins. Noah pronounces a curse upon his son Canaan. Now Ellen White tells us in Patriarchs and Prophets 118.1, the children of Canaan descended to the most degrading forms of heathenism. Though the prophetic curse had doomed them to slavery, the doom was withheld for centuries. Question: what benefit? What's the point of a punishment that your great-great-grandchildren are going to suffer? If I did something wrong today, what's the justice in my great-great-grandchildren having to suffer the punishment for my sin? Is that justice?
No.
No, because this is not judgment that's being pronounced. This is our other problem with misunderstanding the word curse. Curse is not the judgment. This is not a pronouncement of judgment on Ham and Canaan. When God says that iniquity will pass until the 3rd and 4th generation, what is he saying? This is not some arbitrary, unfair judicial decision that he's made. This is an inevitable consequence of human transgression. Sin was introduced into Eden, and there becomes consequences that become unavoidable. We misunderstand this word curse. If this was judgment, it wouldn't have even been fair for it to be pronounced upon Canaan. His father sinned, not Canaan. And then Canaan doesn't suffer the punishment, his grandchildren suffer it. That is not justice. That is an inevitable consequence of a sin. What is introduced into the human family right back in the time of Noah is racism. The one race is somehow superior or can hold another race into subservience. It's racism that begins here, and it isn't the decision of God, it's an inevitable consequence to human transgression. You come down into the history of Abraham. How did Abraham go with that issue? Abraham owned slaves. The Bible tells us he practiced circumcision on all who were born in his house or bought with his money. He practiced slavery. However, we want to define that today. Ancient Israel, what did God instruct them? I've lost that quote, but this is only meant to be a short review. When they take over Canaan, what were they to do? If all that weren't Israelites didn't have an Israelite passport, they placed people into slavery. This is the alpha history of ancient Israel. Remember that. We're coming to the omega history of ancient Israel. Is the race issue done? The race is an issue that's extended throughout all of this time as it dealt with. No, they start to make inroads, they start to make improvements when they recognize that the Jewish nation is not some superior nation, that their role, their job function was as Jesus was, to get on their knees and serve. That starts to be introduced and understood, but you still have the history of the book of Philemon and Onesimus. And it's not resolved here either. You can go from Genesis to Revelation, and the issue of slavery and racism is never dealt with. Then you come into the time of Ellen White. All of a sudden, let's go back to this model. We've become good in the movement at doing repeat and enlarge. And now, as we do repeat and enlarge, I did an experiment, and I took, before, when it came to the diet question, we took the Amiga of ancient Israel, the Amiga of modern Israel. We took the history of the early church and the history of the 144,000. The beginning of ancient Israel is the introduction of the glorious land. The glorious land being the land of Canaan. The alpha history of modern Israel is the rising up of the United States. It's the glorious land being America. So we have two histories of two glorious lands. And if you have two glorious lands, what can you do? Compare and contrast. And to do that, you're going to cut and overlay them. Glorious land 1 with glorious land 2. Now, the glorious land 1 was instructed by God to practice what? So if we want to just use this methodology of repeat and enlarge, what would you expect of glorious land 2? This is where we get into trouble if we refuse to recognize dispensationalism or progression. We come into the time of 1798. The Lambert beast is rising to power, but it already has a stain on it. And what is that stain? 1798, it comes into power and it's already practicing slavery. And it divides that country into two parts. It divides it into the north, and it divides it into the south. And what is the position of the south? The south is saying we should practice slavery, and why are they saying that? Because they're good, Bible-believing, practicing Christians, and they say we can practice slavery because God told ancient Israel to practice slavery. They're using this methodology. And they write books in the history of the Civil War justifying their practices of slavery based on Old and New Testament quotes. They use "Thus saith the Lord" to justify their practice. What do our pioneers say? They say we're not going to use this methodology. We're going to use this methodology. And Ellen White, not just Ellen White, James White, I will say all, but there was a couple of dissenting voices that come under the judgment of Ellen White's pen, but almost all of our elder church recognize the sin of slavery, and she says it will cause the judgment of the nation. And you come to the history of 1861, it's been 63 years. It's a prophetic number. From the time they raised up of God to the time in 1861 when they finished, they've ended that period of probation. They haven't removed this stain, and Ellen White says God is going to make them remove it, and he does that by bringing about a civil war. That civil war is so brutal. More soldiers, more people died in that civil war than in any American war combined from the time it rose to a country until now. Those 5 years of the Civil War, 61, 2, 3, 4, and 5, those 5 years, more soldiers, more people died in that war than in the War of its Independence, in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Afghanistan, or Iraq, or any of those wars combined. That was the destruction of the Civil War in America. The war between the North and the South. And our pioneers understood that slavery was a sin. But it had been instituted by God, and as the South continues to preach from their pulpits, nowhere in inspiration will you see slavery condemned. In fact, in the time of Moses, it's codified. Not saying it's bad, just saying how to do it. We come to her time and she recognizes that sin. But what else does she say? They're practicing segregation. Does she say to become political and protest the race issue in America? She says, don't become political, continue to segregate. This is why I wanted us to see this history between her time and our own. The reason we need to see this history is we can recognize the ideal diet before the time of the end, before 1989. Now she says in her writings what you would refer to as a thus saith the Lord, saying don't become political, don't fight for equality, and segregate your churches. Now in this history, from her death to our own time, you have the civil rights movement. What are they doing? They're becoming political and they're fighting against segregation. Do we believe the civil rights movement is good? Other than the evangelical right, every God-led Christian in that history would have recognized that the civil rights movement was a good movement. It was under the direction of God. Again, we see in the civil rights movement the same mentality as the South. And the evangelical right, they started to rise up because of this civil rights movement, and that rising up against the civil rights movement, I don't think we realise the significance of that, but it led to 1989, it led to the end of the world. It led to our reform line. If it hadn't been for that civil rights movement, you would have never had Jerry Falwell and the moral majority rise up and get Ronald Reagan elected. You would never have had church and state begin to come together. This movement arose out of the pushback from the civil rights movement. And yet we come to our own dispensation down here, and we see race as equal. We do not believe in segregation, and we accept the civil rights movement and the political voice. In fact, down here, we recognize the last president who gave any hope to the United States was Obama, a black man. If you believe Donald Trump, Kenyan, I take that to pride. So, all that we've done in this study of race is use the exact same methodology that we took to diet. This line of progression or of dispensation, understanding the true nature of a curse, that it's a cancer within the human family, and that if God cuts it out at the beginning and starts to change us, then it's just not possible. The human race does not learn that quickly. We're slow. So it takes 6,000 years to begin to cut out this cancer. And it happens progressively from dispensation to dispensation. We can't go back to the time of Christ to understand our ideal diet. We can't go back to ancient Israel to understand how to respond to the issue of different nationalities, different brethren around us. Instead, we have to see how God is dealing with sin over 6,000 years within the human family. From this issue, and again, up to this point, that is kind of okay, because most people in the movement understand that racism is wrong, and I won't say all because I've met them. But most people understand that racism is wrong. Those who don't understand racism is wrong have pretty much all left. But we understand the race issue first. And the reason that we need to understand this race issue first is because we needed to compare it and contrast it with another issue that also began at the beginning, out of sin, and began with the curse. And that is the issue of gender. So we come back to the time of Eden. Male and female, how were they? Equal. So we have a new earth, and they are equal. And down here we're going to come to a new earth. So what should we expect? She was taken as a rib from his side to stand shoulder to shoulder with him. And yet we find that there is transgression introduced into the human family. Transgression always leads to a curse. A curse is the result of transgression. And what is introduced? Inequality. So we come back to the time of Eden and you find submission. Your husband will rule over you. Then you come to the time of Abraham, and how is that dealt with? We have circumcision. Male covenant, patriarchs, led by men. This inequality is evident from the time of Eden through the time of Abraham. This rulership of the male over the female, over the family, over the church, over the country. This rulership of men is evidenced all through this history. And then we get to the time of ancient Israel, and what does Moses do? Does he say this was a curse that is not ideal, that is not what God intended, and we shouldn't practice it? No. Instead, he codifies it. He writes into the Mosaic law what that should look like. How women should submit to their husbands. How men should lead, whether it's in the family, or in the church, or in the government. And you have, through this history, the male priesthood. You come into the time of Christ, and there begins to be some change. We start to see change here when it comes to the subject of racism. I will put that here. Gentile plus a Gentile is the same as a Jew. All are equal. Begins to be dealt with. So back in the time of Christ, you have the beginning of the early church with baptism. There's a new type of covenant, and different to circumcision, which is male. Baptism is male plus female. So you have the introduction of a covenant that practices equality, where both male and female can come into a covenant relationship personally with God. But the main subject issues of equality are not dealt with, not through Genesis, not all the way through Revelation. Through the whole of the Old and New Testament, those subjects are not finally dealt with. Instead, you come into this history, into the book of Ephesians, Ephesians chapter 5, and it tells women how they are to submit to their husbands as if unto God. And we teach that, and I grew up sitting through presentations on that, and I yet have never ever heard a presentation on Ephesians 6, which says, slaves, submit unto your masters as unto God. It's our same old problem. What is our problem? We're inconsistent in the way that we read and interpret inspiration. We come down to the time period of the alpha history of modern Israel. I like what God does in this history. I like how radical he is. All of a sudden, he's expecting a lot from his people. In 1798, did God's people have to already recognize that slavery was wrong? Were they to be given a message somewhere in the 1850s that said, now you can understand it's wrong? Sorry? It was from the beginning, and they had to recognize that it was a sin from the beginning. He expects them to do that without even giving them a message on it. They have to learn that through how they interpret his character. So you come down to this history, and he has his church. You have William Miller, you have Samuel Snow, you have Fitch, you have Litch, you have all of these people, and what do they all have in common? They're all men and they're all white. So there is a broad field in North America of white men that he can use in his service. And he decides he's going to give direct visions, and who does he give them to? William Floyd, and Ellen White. What is God doing? As gently as he can, without killing the body, he's cutting out the cancer. He's making them see who he will speak to and who they have to take a life and death message from. William Floyd was a black man. Ellen White was a woman. And William Floyd was given a vision from God that was a life and death message before slavery ended in America. So when he spoke, he did that at the risk of his life. Not even Ellen White faced that type of risk. So he spoke out at the risk of his life, and the reason that we do not hear more about him was because his wife was afraid. And while he was quiet, we do know that he fulfilled his mission. There was a third man given a vision. Foss. Hazen Foss. And how did he do? He failed. He failed to share the message that God had given him because he was afraid. He wasn't black and he wasn't a woman, but he was afraid to speak the truth to God's people. So he failed in his mission. Do you think God is teaching them something? It was not necessary. There are many white men that he had available, but instead he decides to make a point. We come down to our time, and from 1989, what do you have the beginning of? God is raising up. Sorry? Loud voices. He's like raising up the 144,000, but I want to say the priesthood. What do we understand about the priests? Male and female. So what is he beginning to do? People can act like it's some type of new thing, but throughout this history, from the time of Ellen White to 1989, there was already a recognition, a push for the ending of segregation, for a political voice, and a vote for the black community in America. And I want to take us to one quote, one Ellen White quote that I find quite interesting. It's from 10MR 69.2. 10MR 69.2. Ellen White says the following. She's been visited by a friend of hers. Her friend is known as Mrs. Graves. Mrs. Graves visits her. 69.1 begins this section. I'll begin it in 69.1. She has this visit from a Mrs. Graves. She had a burden upon her mind, Mrs. Graves, and ever since she knew I was at home, she desired to see me. She said she felt that she must talk out her feelings to me. She is desirous that women's suffrage should be looked into by me. She says women ought to vote, and she related many things of startling character which were legalized in France and St. Louis, and an effort was made to carry them out in Chicago this year, but the effort failed. Houses of ill fame are legalized. Women who travel alone through those cities, if they are the least suspicious of them, are taken up by the authorities and their cases are investigated. If they are diseased, they are placed in the care of the doctors and cured. Then they are fit for the visits of men and are placed in a legalized home for men to satisfy their lusts upon. No examination is made of the men, and where this law is carried into effect, the crime and immorality resemble the condition of the world which existed previous to the flood. It's interesting when we talk about the history previous to the flood, how there was this great immorality. And what was the sin before the flood? Going by this quote, this is abuse. The sin before the flood was not just people living happy lives, they were abusive relationships. Those women who were traveling, who were vulnerable before the flood, they were vulnerable. Those women who would travel alone, they were seen as vulnerable. They were arrested by the government. If they were seen to have any type of illness or disease, they were forced into the care of doctors and supposedly cured, and then placed essentially in legalized brothels. Mrs. Graves viewed the matter as I do in regard to the increase of crime and demoralization of society. She says women must vote if this law is to be withstood. We had a long talk in regard to temperance. I told her that my mind was unprepared for any such matters as women voting. She had been thinking and dwelling upon these things, and her mind was right upon them, while my work was of another character. So what is Ellen White saying? Mrs. Graves has been considering this, and her mind is right. What does it mean to be right? You've borne fruit, and then that fruit has developed until it is ready. It's ready for picking. Her mind is ready. But Ellen White says, my work has been of another character. It hasn't been about this issue of women voting. And she says, my mind is unprepared. It's unright. So this issue of women's equality in politics in her time, what's her position on it? Not that it shouldn't be done, it's the same as the diet question. It will one day be right, I can see it in the future, but in my time, in my mind, her mind was not ready. So in her day, she never fights for women's equality. She never fights for them to have the right to vote, and that doesn't happen until after her death in 1919. 1919 is the 100-year anniversary this year. So in her dispensation, what's the problem? Not that it shouldn't happen, but it would happen too soon. This is because people are slow. This is why God deals with us, restores us over 6,000 years. God could have just told Ellen White that women should have a political voice, but she is as much subject to her dispensation as Christ was to his own dispensation when he followed their same practices of diet. He ate fish because he's subject to the rules of his dispensation. Moses ate meat because he's subject to the rules of his dispensation. He ordained a male priesthood because he's subject to the rules of his dispensation. Ellen White spoke of the need for equally paid female teachers, but she says she's not ready for women to vote. She's subject to the rules of her dispensation. When we come to our dispensation, we have to follow the rules of our dispensation. And there are people in the movement, just like those who said that we should be eating dairy and eggs, because Ellen White says that in some cases we can, they don't say some cases because they don't see the context of those quotes, but she says we should eat dairy and eggs, so in our dispensation we should. A leading member who left this movement in October last year, as I was presenting the Midnight Cry message, he has a bit of an issue with women. And so you can imagine that as I am presenting and attention is being given to that message that is not going towards him, he starts to have a personal problem with me. And so what he started to do was, in my hearing, share his beliefs about women. I'm talking about Brother Theodore. And one of the beliefs that he holds to, and that he shared through his workings, was that women should not have the right to vote. Why? Because he does not understand progression or restoration. Instead, they want to live as if in his dispensation, the dispensation of Ellen White, when she was not ready. So they hold on to these views. We shouldn't hold on to these views any more than we hold on to these or these. I don't mean to discount inspiration, it has a place. But we have to take those quotes and apply rules to them. When Ellen White says that it's an abomination, a sin, to spend money on a bicycle, do we take that and apply that to our dispensation? No. Does it have something to teach us? Yes. It has a principle for us. We take the principle, but we don't take the thus saith the Lord as it's written the way that people would want us to when it comes to race or gender. What I want us to see is that the methodology that we use to understand the issues of racism and sexism and how they come to this history of the 144,000 and complete a work of restoration. This movement does not endorse segregation. It endorses complete equality when it comes to race. In fact, our greatest threat right now, the evangelical right, is on the opposite side of that spectrum. When it comes to sexism, we teach complete equality from Eden to Eden, from new earth to new earth. And the people that have seen this whole study as some type of an attack on inspiration already use that same methodology when they come to many other quotes, and I've highlighted diet. They already use it, just not consistently. So when we come down to our time, and we come down to 2019, God has raised up a priesthood of equal male and female, and they are equal in the home, they are equal in the church movement, they are to be equal politically, on every level, shoulder to shoulder. And we recognize that theory. It becomes the testing message of the midnight cry. I want to keep this, but I need more space, so I might need to erase it. Do you mind if I can rewrite? Do we have a photo of what's on the other side? Yeah. A brother's study? I can rewrite it for you. We come to our history and we recognize the need to go back to the diet instituted in Eden. We recognize that that isn't just a theory. What do we have to do? We have to practice it. So when we recognized that, and at the German camp meeting, 2 female elders were ordained, immediately, believe that was the same day, we met in the evening with representatives from Future for America, and they split from this movement. That was the direct cause of the shaking, the greatest shaking the priests will ever face, was as a backlash against the study of racism and sexism. And what they are attacking is the methodology behind it. To erase the methodology behind it, they've had to begin to erase the entirety of the Midnight Cry, and then, step by step, but day by day, you may notice them erase study after study after study, even things that they previously taught themselves. But this was the cause, this study was the root cause. But to bring it home to us, I want us to think of it on a deeper level. I have some fear that in the movement, something that has surprised me, but I can also understand, is how the subject of trousers and women wearing trousers has become such a hot topic for people. And all trousers are is a recognition of 2 things. Trousers become a symbol that we accept equality and we accept dispensationalism. It's the 2 tests of the Midnight Cry. Do we accept the message and do we accept the methodology behind it? Trousers just become a symbol of that acceptance. But I want us to think about the lines that we have. The line of the 144,000. It begins in 1989. The plowing. From 9/11 To the Sunday, Lord, falls the early rain. From the Sunday, Lord, to the close of probation, falls the latter rain. From the close of probation to the harvest, close of probation to the second advent, is the harvest. This is our key reform line, and from this we've built 3 other fractals. So we take the line of 144,000 and we bring it. We bring it first to the line of the priests, the first group called. You have the priests from 1989 to 9/11. And what next? 2014, 2019, Panium. 2014 being for us the Sunday law, 2019 being the close of probation or the shut door. The first group called. Then we have the second group called. And when do they begin? 9/11. The Sunday law. First day of cloud. 2014 begins their early rain. 2019 begins their latter rain. Panium begins their harvest. And the Sunday law, the second advent. And then we have the Nethinims. The first the priests, the second the Levites, and the third the Nethinims. And they go through the same 4-step agricultural process, beginning for them in 2014, which is why we have seen the escalation in external events so significantly from 2014 forward. So I want to focus on the line of the priests. If we were to take this, for those who have seen those studies, to the end of ancient Israel, to the history of Christ, what would this waymark be? The birth, 4 BC. What would this waymark be? The baptism. This waymark. This is the imprisonment of John. I agree with you. I want to call it the first temple cleansing. It's where the work of Christ begins. At the same time he's beginning his work, John is imprisoned. So this is where you see the transition between the first and the second leader. What is this waymark? The cross. This waymark? Pentecost. And at Pentecost, they go to the second group, back to the church, yes? Until when? 34 AD. In 34 AD, where did they go? To the world. The harvest of the Gentiles. 490 years has been cut off for the Jews. They've finished their probationary time period, and the message was to go to the Gentiles. So for the priests, they go through the ploughing. They plough. Then they go through early rain, latter rain, harvest. When do they go to work? When do they fulfill their job function? Is everyone content with here? Anyone not happy with this? We go to work at Pannion. We begin to fulfill our job function here, yes?
Yes.
Take this back to the line of 144,000. When do they begin their job function?
Sunday.
Yeah? So for the priests, they begin their job function at the second advent. At their second advent. 144,000? Sunday rule. Why? Did we begin our work in 2014? The 144,000, what condition are they in here? They haven't even got their latter rain yet. They're planted back here. They're growing here. They have fruit, and what's that fruit look like?
Immature.
It's immature fruit. How can they go to work? When do the 144,000 fulfill their designated job function? After the second advent. What's the role of the 144,000? To be teachers. Teaching who? The universe. It didn't take too long. I'd flip the board over the other side and we go through them. Abraham, Moses, Noah. Do they understand the nature of Christ's kingdom? No. I'm sure that before his death, John didn't fully understand it. All of those people, even the ones that are our heroes, they were earlier in the history of those 6,000 years. There's no way that Moses looked into the future and saw a female priesthood. They have a lot of catching up to do. We are the farthest in that line of progression. So what is the task of the 144,000? To go back to all those faithful men and women over the last 6,000 years and teach them all that we've learned. That last closing work of restoration that they have not witnessed, we must set before them and teach them of. So the 144,000 go to work in heaven after the second advent. There will be people there from your country, before it was named Kenya, who did not know of Christianity. They will not know where they are. They will not know who Jesus is. And we will need to sit with them and tell them, not just of that restoration, we will need to tell them about Abraham, about God. So there is an important job function to do after the second advent as teachers. The 144,000, of which every one of us hope to be a member of, all of their preparation is to be able to have a group of people who can teach everyone who's lived over that last 6,000 years, who has been faithful, can tell them of what final restoration looks like. So I have a little bit of a point to make here that some people won't like. I'm warning you in advance. If you're on this line of 144,000 and you're living down here, and you've got the theory of the message, but you don't want to practice it. You're alive. God decided you were going to be one of the 144,000, and you come down here after the close of probation, and you decide, I accept all the theory, but when I get to heaven, I don't think I'm going to teach anymore. Do you think you're going to get to heaven and tell Jesus, I don't really feel ready, everyone else can do it, I'm going to be one of the 144,000 that sits at home and doesn't teach? How do you think that's going to go over? Is that going to be accepted? No. So if it's not acceptable here, what about over here? This is the deeper message of equality that contends to be missed, and that I fear over the last few months, with the shaking, with everyone concerned about dress, and with different issues arising in the movement, can get lost. There is a personal restoration to take place. God personally wants to tell people who have been damaged through racism and sexism that they are in his eyes of equal value, that Jesus would have died for just them. There is a personal restoration. There is a vindicating of God's character that must take place. But there is also just a logistical issue. The logistical issue is that we are about to go to work. And when God had us understand and teach equality, in this history, logistically, all he's doing is doubling his workforce. All he's doing is saying, the numbers of the priests are few, and I want to remind you, this was a shut door. There is never going to be another priest added to this movement. That's significant when you actually see how few people are in some countries. I recognize your group here is quite large, but even when you think of your group here compared to the work that needs to be done, you are small. Let alone other countries where there are a few people, vast areas of the world, Asia, all across that territory that has been, we don't currently know of anyone in Asia who is on this message, that we have been able to have consistent contact with. So the work of the priests is significant. And the message of the midnight cry, the message of equality, is not to remain a dead theory. It's deeper than that. Its intent is to double the workforce. Its intent is to be put into practice. The 144,000 are in training to be teachers. We all hope to make up that number, and every one of us who are of that number will have to teach. So the priests, when we come into this history, we are not allowed to just make it a theory. We have to practice it. Because when we come to fulfill our job function, we're going to have to teach. I recognize that in this country and in other countries, there is a difficulty to reach the women of this movement. That is an added weight, an added burden to bear for every woman in this room. What it means is you're special. What it means is this movement needs you. You're not, this message isn't just about restoring, justifying or vindicating God's character. It's not just about a personal restoration. It's also about telling you your job function. We are to be the 144,000. We are to go back to the church of Pentecost and the world at Sunday Law, and you have a personal part to play in that. That is why Parminder and I are in every single ministry. We are pushing that women teach 50% of all presentations done. We're pushing that there is a 50-50 split because we are seeing that people are keeping it as a theory and they're not putting it as a practice. The fact that the women in this country, and I've also heard some of the older generation in this country, the fact that they can be harder to reach in this message means that there should be an added push or effort to reach them. It means that the women in this room must be teachers. And you might think that you know a little. Every time a woman says she knows a little, I sit with her and it's evidence she knows a lot more than she thinks she does. And if she actually taught, she would start to see what her voice means and how much she actually has to share. Take the little and share it. It's how you will grow. It's how you will fulfill your job function. This is not just a theory. It must be put into practice by this ministry in Kenya, by every ministry across our world field. It is a message of vindicating God's character. It is also a message about doubling our workforce because we have a very real work to do. And that is what each of us has been raised up at this time to do, male or female, old or young. Wherever you find yourself, new to this message or old to this message, you are a priest. You kneel with me in closing Father in heaven, thank you for how in these closing scenes of this earth's history we can see your character vindicated, how Satan has twisted what people have thought you are, how Satan has twisted the understanding of your character. And Lord, we see this methodology vindicated. You see equality on every level. You do not look at someone as inferior or superior, but all as equals. Lord, I know that the idea of teaching is difficult. It can be terrifying. I personally know the difficulty, the anxiety of beginning that work. It's not easy. But Lord, you have not raised us up as priests or as 144,000 without also enabling us to fulfill the job that you decided to bestow upon us. You gave us this title. You chose to work with this human family. I pray that each of us will see our value in your eyes and will feel empowered to fulfill that job function. That even though we may be new, even though we may only feel we know a little, that little is the difference between life and death for someone in this community, that it is significant. May we all begin to take up that banner across the world field, Lord. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.